The Pac-12 formally announced Texas State as the 9th full member. So what's next?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy July, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Well, folks, NIL GO is officially underway. What does it mean for Gonzaga and for college basketball? We're going to talk about that to close out the show. But first, we are discussing what ended up being the second biggest news on Monday for the Gonzaga Bulldogs. The fact that Texas State has officially joined the new look Pac-12 conference for the 2026-27 season, giving the Pac-12 a full 8th member for football, which was incredibly important for the conference. We will talk about why that is, what this addition means for Gonzaga, and then we will talk about the next steps for the Pac-12. And to be clear, the Pac-12 has laid out pretty clearly what their steps are, and they are at step 3 out of 4 in their kind of long-term plan. And so we're going to talk about that from what Teresa Gould, the commissioner, has said, what other reporters have said, kind of what these next steps might look like for the Pac-12 and what those steps would mean for Gonzaga. So we're going to get into all of that. And I said the second biggest news of Monday for the Zags, in case you missed it, Monday's episode of Locked On Zags, we discussed this. Mario Saint-Superi, the 6'3" Spanish guard, 19-year-old, has officially committed to Gonzaga. They announced it in a press release on Monday morning. So if you're looking for information about Saint-Superi and his commitment to Gonzaga, what he means for the team this upcoming season, definitely go check that show out. We'll have much more on Saint-Superi the next couple of days, weeks, months here on Locked On Zags. But for right now, we want to focus on this conference realignment move. And it's not an unexpected one. It's not a shock to anybody who has been following this story, even just casually following this story. You likely already knew that Texas State, the Bobcats out of the Sun Belt Conference, were going to be this last edition for the Pac-12 Conference. They needed to make an addition by July 1st, today, as many of you are listening to this, 2026, and the Sun Belt's exit fees or buyout fee was going from $5 million on June 30th to $10 million on July 1st. So it was very obvious that that Texas State wanted out of the Sun Belt before that deadline hit. The Pac-12 needed to add a new school before that deadline hit. So both sides were moving in conjunction with each other to get this thing done before July 1st. They didn't use a lot of, or they didn't give a lot of extra time. They went right up to the last minute, but it was reported late last week that the Pac-12 had extended an offer to Texas State, or was in the process of extending an offer, that they'd already communicated with the Sun Belt, that Texas State had already scheduled a Board of Regents meeting on Monday morning. So we kind of knew that this was all coming together to be finalized on Monday morning. And that was, in fact, the case for this Pac-12 conference, now adding Texas State to a conference that already includes, of course, Oregon State and Washington State, the kind of founding members of the Pac-12, and then the 5 Mountain West schools, that's Utah State, Boise State, Colorado State, San Diego State, and Fresno State, and then, of course, Gonzaga in there as well. So you have 7 football playing schools and then an 8th school in Gonzaga. The Pac-12 needed to be at 8 full members that also sponsor football. That needed to happen for them to be FBS eligible, which on the football side is the most important thing. It was critical that they added a full member that sponsored football. That is where Texas State came into play, because they were struggling with other options. The Mountain West, with the mediation going on, was just not really an option for the Pac-12 to try to pursue a UNLV or an Air Force. They kind of missed the window there. The exit fees for the schools in the American Athletic Conference, namely Memphis and Tulane and some of those others, were just exorbitant and not in a spot that the Pac-12 was comfortable paying at this time. We'll talk more about that later. It doesn't mean there are not going to be future additions from the American Athletic Conference, but it wasn't feasible at this time. So the Pac-12 kind of pivoted towards Texas State. What we do not know at the time of this recording is how much of a share Texas State is getting out of this media deal. We know that Gonzaga is getting a full share, the same amount of money from the conference media deal as the other schools, despite not having football. What we do not know is if Texas State has also bargained their way into a full share. John Quinzana, who I will cite a handful of times in this show because he is one of the most dedicated reporters covering the Pac-12 and all of these breaking news that's been happening, he indicated that the Texas State is not getting a full share. Whether that means it's a 75% share, a 50% share, whether it's escalating up to being a full share in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, none of that is known at this time. It might be known by the time you're listening to this, in which case we will discuss it. But right now, it's not something that has been made public information. As for the Gonzaga side of things, we have talked about Texas State a few times because, as I said, this has been a pretty known, pretty much confirmed thing for at least a couple of weeks now. And in reality, it's been talked about as a likely scenario, likely outcome for the Pac-12 for months at this point. So we've been paying attention to this Bobcats program in San Marcos, Texas, located just between Austin and San Antonio. The campus is beautiful. By the way, you can see the Pac-12 post on Instagram. There's a river running right through campus. It's gorgeous. And going to rival some of the other really pretty campuses that are in this new look Pac-12. Texas State's going to be right up there with them. Program 35 miles east of UT Austin. That's Texas, the Longhorns. So they're located next to some really powerful college sports programs. This program has a big campus. They have a big alumni base, and they have a solid amount of resources. In fact, Texas State is a top 25 in terms of largest undergrad enrollments among public schools in the U.S. It's one of the 25 biggest public schools in the U.S., according to undergrad enrollment. That's a good addition for a up-and-coming growing conference. Just based on that fact alone, that is a compelling reason to add a school. They have over 40,000 students, and now the Pac-12 has a footprint in Texas. It's important for recruiting, not just in football, but in men's basketball as well. Gonzaga obviously knows this. They've recruited Drew Timme out of Texas. More recently, they've recruited Parker Jefferson out of Texas. Jeremy Jones, they found him playing for Rice in Texas. Dimitri Goodson was recruited out of Texas. Like, this is a program that has gone to Texas to try to find high-level players to come to their program. So now having road games in Texas, while it's not ideal for a lot of reasons, it is ideal for that specific reason for Gonzaga. Outside of that, however, Texas State is not a program that is moving the needle in a positive direction for the conference's men's basketball, and therefore is not a super great addition for Gonzaga. I suspect they were not pumped about this addition. I'm sure they understood it. It was a unanimous vote to accept them, so Gonzaga was not a naysayer in terms of allowing Texas State. But I do imagine that a program that has been D1 since 1984, yet has only made the NCAA tournament twice, is probably not Gonzaga's first choice. This team was a 15 seed back in 1994. They were a 16 seed in 1997. That's it. They haven't made the tournament since Mark Few took over as the head coach at Gonzaga. That's a good reference for you all to have on this team. They did actually win the Sun Belt regular season both in 2021 and in 2022, but they lost by 3 in the championship game, the conference championship game in 21, and then they lost in the semifinals in 2022. So they just missed making the tournament either of those 2 years. At this point, you kind of just have to hope that a program that has so much history, so much alumni, so much current students. It's located in San Marcos is only 70,000 people. It's not a huge town, but it's located near San Antonio, near Austin, and has this big alumni base and a solid amount of resources. You kind of just have to hope that Texas State's basketball program will improve being a part of the Pac-12. My assumption is that Texas State is going to allocate a huge chunk of the resources that they have into making sure their football program is competitive in the Pac-12, likely at the expense of men's basketball. I could be wrong about that, but I doubt it. That doesn't mean that the basketball program will not get better or will not succeed. It just means that Texas State is going to prioritize making sure their football program succeeds, because that is what's going to get them notoriety. That is what's going to get them more money. That is what's going to get them more fame. All of the things that they want for Texas State matter mostly from football. We're talking about Texas. We're talking about Texas. They care about football there. They don't care as much about basketball. Having said all that, I'm not as down on this move as some. I know some people are really disappointed and think that this is a huge problem for Gonzaga. It's an extra road trip. It's a long road trip. It's a long road trip to play a not very good team. Whatever. Like, I mean, it's not great. It's not great, but it's far from the end of the world. Gonzaga is about to make 4 times as much money in the Pac-12 than they were making in the WCC in a time period where how much money you have is incredibly, crucially important for building your roster and developing your program. It's hard to be too upset about anything happening in the Pac-12, knowing what we know about the amount of money coming into this program. Well, folks, now that a full member has been added, what's next for the Pac-12? Like I said, they've already laid it out. They've let us know what the next steps are for this conference. And we're going to talk about that and what it means for Gonzaga coming up in just a second. But first, folks, summer sports are in full swing. Whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf out on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it just a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game action while your friends are getting sunburned out on the beach. You can use FanDuel to track your favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. So whether you're placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet right out into the 9th inning, FanDuel makes it feel like you're part of the action. And Gonzaga's odds actually fell from plus 3,000 to plus 3,500 to win it all in 2026. Even after the addition of Mario Saint-Superi, feels like a good chance to earn an extra $25 on your $5 bet. And as a reminder, if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if that first bet wins. So open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still talking about the Pac-12's edition of the Bobcats from Texas State as the 8th full football-sponsored member of the Pac-12 conference and the 9th member if you include Gonzaga in the conference. Now we're going to talk about what's next. We talked a little bit about who Texas State is, the good and the bad of this edition for the conference, and more specifically for Gonzaga. And now I kind of want to talk about what we perceive or expect the next steps for the Pac-12 to be and how those could affect this Gonzaga program. So Commissioner Teresa Gould has been very clear in conversations she's had on podcasts and with other media outlets in various places, kind of about the plan for the Pac-12. It's been fairly well laid out. And just because it's not like published on the Pac-12 website or anything like that, I think a lot of people, and certainly people who follow this conference, like Oregon State, Washington State fans who maybe have a little bit of PTSD from the George Kliavkoff era and the falling apart of the old Pac-12, maybe have this fear that there's not a plan and that people are kind of just flying by the seat of their pants. But the conference has laid it out, and they've finished number 1 and number 2, and they're in the middle of number 3. And then we have number 4 coming up. So I'm going to read what the plan is, kind of paraphrased based on multiple conversations that Commissioner Gould and others have had about the conference, and then kind of talk about what those the current and future steps are and what they mean for the Zags. So here's kind of a summary of the 4 steps of the plan. Number 1, lock down the key media deal components. Check. This is basically the Pac-12 getting at least one big part of their media deal done and publicized so that people know, hey, this is a legitimate conference. We have a legitimate media deal. We are taking positive steps. The Pac-12 accomplished this when it was revealed a week or 2 ago that the Pac-12's anchor partner for a media rights deal is the CBS. CBS Sports Network, Paramount Plus are all going to feature Pac-12 events. They're going to feature the championship events on CBS's flagship program for both football and basketball. CBS Sports Network is going to carry a handful of sporting events from football and basketball as well. Paramount Plus is going to have some other games there as well. I'm curious kind of the spread for that. And I think until we know the other media partners, we're not going to have a good sense of that. My suspicion is that Paramount Plus probably won't get a ton of these sporting events, specifically not Gonzaga sporting events, because I think Gonzaga is a big enough draw from a men's basketball perspective that the majority of Gonzaga's like good Pac-12 games, like their San Diego State matchups and Boise State matchups and games like that, will get CBS or at least CBS Sports Network. But I'm sure there will be some events that end up getting housed on Paramount Plus. Regardless, this was the first big step for the Pac-12 was get that out, get that publicized, get that known that CBS is committing for 5 years to the Pac-12. They're spending their money. They're, wanting this product on their channels, on their various platforms, and it's a compelling, product for other media partners to get involved with, and just kind of a nice message to the rest of the sports world, like, hey, we're not going anywhere. Number 2 was add enough members to solidify the Pac-12 survival. Check. That is what they accomplished on Monday. Finalizing the deal with Texas State to ensure that they are a part of the Pac-12 conference means that the conference is now FBS eligible. They have enough schools in the conference in order to compete for a national championship on the college football space. And it is a huge, monumental deal for the Pac-12 to not be having to worry about this, to not be in a panic situation of like, are the Mountain West schools going to start to panic and flee and get scared because of this? Like, we needed to get that final school. It wasn't the Pac-12's top choice. They probably won't ever admit that, but it is pretty obvious that their top choices were probably Memphis, maybe Tulane or Rice or somebody in the American Athletic Conference that they could bring in. But the exorbitant exit fees made that untenable. They looked at UNLV or Air Force, but the timing wasn't right. They probably should have grabbed them the first time they poached the Mountain West, but they didn't do that. And so they just kind of found themselves in this awkward holding pattern where Texas State ultimately ended up emerging as the ideal candidate for them from a financial perspective, from a timing perspective, from a the potential for them to be a high upside addition to the conference perspective, but also just from we need to get this done now. We don't have any more time to waste to twiddle our thumbs, to think about other options, to try to get creative, think outside the box. They were out of time. You add the school that's in front of you, you negotiate whatever deal they negotiated with Texas State, you get it done, you get the announcements all out on Monday, and you move on. And that's where you get to number 3. Number 3 is where the Pac-12 is currently, which is finish up the media deal and nail down structural aspects for the new conference. So this is where we're at right now. And what this means is confirming the other media partners outside of CBS. There's likely going to be 3 or 4 total media partners for the Pac-12. We know CBS is one of them. We have widespread suspicion that the CW is expected to be one of them as well. The CW has done football games for the Pac-12 they did them last year. They're going to do them this year for Oregon State and Washington State. It seemed to be a partnership that worked well for both sides. The CW is in every household. As a reminder, the Pac-12 has staunchly stated that they care more about exposure and visibility than they do money. I think that you say that in part when you know you're planning to work with media partners that are going to give you exposure and not as much money. I think that is a good message to get out ahead of time. I'm not saying that means that they're lying through their teeth or anything. I just think that that's what you say when you know that you're going to end up making a little less money than some people thought, but you're going to be on networks that everybody has in their house. So take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. But the CW is very likely going to be one of these partners. I don't expect Gonzaga basketball to be on the CW all that much. I think it's primarily going to be used for football, but maybe they'll have a few games there, here and there. We'll see what happens. And then the last partners, John Canzano's reporting Warner Brothers Discovery, which is TNT, TBS, is pretty heavily involved. I suspect that will be one of them. So if TNT, TBS, certainly they're missing their basketball coverage as they have lost a lot of it in recent years, lost their NBA contracts. So replacing it with college basketball makes some sense. So I wouldn't be surprised if WBD coming in is actually where a lot of the college basketball games do end up, TBS or TNT. So it might be a good idea to check to see if you still have those channels for those of you who've maybe cut the cord on cable. And then the last one is kind of up in the air. Maybe it's a streamer like Amazon or Apple TV or something like that. Could it be ESPN? And John Canzano's kind of cooled on it being ESPN as a full partner, although he does believe that ESPN Plus will still house the non-revenue sports. So like that's where softball or baseball games would be, soccer games would end up being on ESPN Plus, but he doesn't think they're going to be a big partner. I talked about this a little bit on Monday's show as well. It's kind of sad for the Sean Farnham of it all, for the Farnham flatbread and the long-standing relationship that Gonzaga has had with ESPN. But I'm not going to give a full eulogy for Gonzaga and ESPN's relationship until we know for sure that ESPN's not involved, because I'm not that confident that they're not going to sneak in and find a way to get at least involved on the basketball side if they can. And then step 4 is go after additional expansion candidates. So the Pac-12 is done right now. They are pretty confident in not adding any big-time full-scale members. And AD told John Canzano the focus will continue to be on high-value full membership, then high-value football-only members. But the thing is, there's not a lot of full members out there that are going to be all that appealing to the Pac-12. If they were, they would have added them over Texas State. The fact that they didn't means there's like Louisiana or like New Mexico State or UT San Antonio, maybe, but the exit fees are exorbitant for UTSA. So I just don't think there's a lot of full members out there that make a lot of sense. So I think the next step for the Pac-12 after they complete their media package and get that all sorted out is to look for some affiliate members, some football-only members. Maybe that's Memphis. Maybe they find a way to get Memphis football and Memphis throws the rest of their sports in the Big East and gets out of the American Athletic Conference. Maybe they try that with Tulane football. There are some other football-only members that make some sense. Rice, UTSA. Canzano did report that North Texas has not heard from the Pac-12 in a while. They've been kind of floated as a potential option there, but it doesn't sound like there's a lot of communication happening on both sides there. But that's something to keep an eye on. I think if the next edition for the Pac-12, if it's not a full member, I think will likely be a football-only member, which doesn't do anything for Gonzaga unless that football-only member comes with like a scheduling agreement for basketball. So like if Memphis joins as a football-only member, but they also agree in principle to play one non-conference game against a Pac-12 school every year or something along those lines, that could be a way for it to impact Gonzaga. Certainly they would love to get Memphis on the schedule every once in a while. So that could be a positive for the Zags in this space. And then after that, it is worth noting that in Canzano's recent article, he also said that Pac-12 ADs, for scheduling reasons, prefer 10 basketball playing members. They have 9. And if they add a football-only member like Memphis or Tulane or whomever, they're still only at 9. So does that mean you add a basketball-only member? We're going to talk a lot more later this week, depending what other news breaks, about whether that could be St. Mary's or not. Because St. Mary's is just kind of waiting, sitting, waiting, wondering, hoping, twiddling their thumbs, trying to see if the Pac-12 is going to show interest. Canzano reported that St. Mary's is understanding of the fact that the Pac-12 is looking at full members and then football-only members before they look at basketball-only members. St. Mary's would not get anywhere near a full share. If they were to join the Pac-12, they would get far less money than Gonzaga is getting, but they make a lot of sense reasonably for this conference to bring in to bolster what is already a strong basketball conference. Maybe it's not St. Mary's. Maybe it's Wichita State. Again, those exit fees in the AAC are pretty heavy, but as a basketball-only member, it could make some sense. Maybe Wichita State could toss their other programs back in the Missouri Valley Conference or somewhere else. It could make some sense. Wichita State's a school I'd keep an eye on. St. Mary's, obviously. I think after that, I don't think the Pac-12 would – I don't think it's worth it for the Pac-12 to do Santa Clara or San Francisco or programs like that. Even though I think they're good programs, I don't think that would happen. I think it's St. Mary's, Wichita State, or probably bust for the Pac-12, but that's something to keep an eye on as well. Well, folks, closing out the show, the House settlement rules are going into effect on July 1st, and the new NIL GO software could have a massive impact on Gonzaga's competitive future. We're going to talk about that in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Closing out the show, talking about the House settlement, which so many of the rules and descriptions and everything that happened in that very lengthy settlement that came out about a month, not even a month, a couple of weeks ago, most of it goes into effect on July 1st. So again, many of you listening on Tuesday, July 1st. So a lot of these rules are just starting to go into effect, and we're going to start to really see the impact, the ramifications, positive and negative, for the House settlement on college athletics. And of course, from our perspective, men's college basketball and what it means for Gonzaga. So as a reminder, because we're talking NIL GO, I want to kind of give a little bit of a backstory on what this is. The power conferences, which did include the Pac-12, by the way, created an enforcement entity called the College Sports Commission, the CSC, to enforce NIL restrictions, roster limits, and rev share. So this is a separate entity, not the NCAA, not monitored by the NCAA, not, has nothing to do with them, but it was created by the power conferences. And this specific commission's job is to enforce the restrictions around NIL, the restrictions around roster limits, the restrictions around rev share as part of the House settlement. The CEO for this new College Sports Commission is Brian Seeley. He's a former MLB executive and U.S. Attorney General, and he is building two wings of this CSC, the investigative arm and the enforcement arm. NIL GO is part of this enforcement, or both the investigative and enforcement arm. NIL GO is a software that has been created to operate the new NIL clearinghouse to vet any NIL deal that is over $600 that is offered by a collective, by a booster, or by a brand that's associated with a particular school. The goal of NIL GO is to collect these kind of submissions for these NIL deals and determine if the deal is, quote, fair market value. The factors they're looking at. What is the relationship between the payer and the school? Is the athlete selling a good or a service? Is money that is being offered to the student athlete commensurate with other NIL deals? Those are the main things they're looking at. They're trying to prevent pay for play, which is we will give you this amount of money to play for our team, nothing else. NIL, as a reminder, still stands for name, image, likeness, and is still in theory predicated on you getting paid and able to profit off of your name, your image, and your likeness, not just your ability to play for the basketball team. So if you go do a commercial, if you go sign autographs, if you go, get a sandwich named after you at a local sub shop, like those things are you getting paid for your name, your image, and your likeness. A booster handing you $2 million to play basketball for Kentucky is not you getting paid for your name, image, likeness. That is what the NIL GO system is attempting to prevent. They will, after doing their investigation, they will give you three potential decisions: cleared, not cleared, or need more information. If you do not get cleared, you have the choice to appeal to another separate governing body. You can redo the deal, fix whatever it needs to be fixed in order to have it get cleared, or you can just proceed anyway. I thought that was interesting when I read the article about this, like, oh, you just keep going. And then what happens? And the website says, well, there's penalties. And one of the penalties could be loss of eligibility. So the big question that exists now, is any of this enforceable? Because if not, then does it even matter? The goal, of course, is that this ends up enforceable. Everybody, I mean, not everybody, but most people want this to be enforced. They want this to be something where this College Sports Commission can determine effectively, hey, you have submitted to pay this player $2 million to do a 30-second ad read. Everybody else who is, doing a similar type NIL deal is getting paid $6,000 for this or whatever. This is obviously not fair market value. This is not commensurate with other deals. We're going to shut this down. That's what they want. But is it enforceable? Jim Phillips, the commissioner of the ACC, said punishment has not been decided, and that Seeley, the new CEO of this College Sports Commission, is kind of going to be in charge of determining the punishment. So how much of it is actually like, hey, we're pulling your scholarship, your team is vacating wins? Like, is it going to be that extreme? Is it just going to be like you have to give back the money? Like, what are the punishments going to look like? How do they vary based on the for lack of a better word, crime that is committed by these deals that aren't legitimate? It's going to be kind of complicated. It's going to be a little messy. Antitrust laws basically exist so that an entity cannot be the sole determiner for what is fair market value, and yet that is what is being asked of the College Sports Commission. They're basically saying we, as a separate entity, get to determine if your value is what we consider fair market. People aren't going to like that. People are going to fight that. And there's a chance they win. There's a chance they win. So much so that the power conferences actually asked schools in their conferences to sign a memo saying that they will not sue to challenge NIL GO. If you are proactively asking your members to not sue to challenge something, that means you think that there's going to potentially be a viable lawsuit that could come out of this. And not surprisingly, by the way, many of these teams and programs are hesitant to sign this memo. It's also worth pointing out that they're asking the schools to sign these memos. They are not asking student athletes to sign these memos. They're not asking NIL collectives to sign these memos. So if a student athlete feels like, hey, I agreed to this NIL deal. You told me I can't do it. You told me I'm not getting fair market value. I think you're wrong. I'm going to sue you. There is nothing stopping them from doing that. There's going to be a lawsuit on this fairly soon. I guarantee it. I guarantee it that it's going to happen. And there's a decent chance that antitrust laws will win out and they will say, you cannot prevent a student athlete from making money in this way. Now, I'm not a legal scholar. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to pretend to have the full scope of knowledge of how a lawsuit like this might or could or should or will play out. But I know that it's going to happen. And I know that the NCAA's attempts to prevent student athletes from making money have not gone particularly well for the NCAA. So I am very intrigued by how this happens. I know that eventually these big programs are going to find ways to pay their student athletes. Kentucky is not going to be limited by $20.5 million in funds, because a lot of that money is going to go to their football program, but Mark Pope's not going to sit around and say, yeah, we spent $20 million on our basketball program last year. We're content only spending $7 million this year. That's not going to happen. They're going to find a way to get them that money. And I'm not saying they're going to cheat. I think they're going to try to go through these legal routes through the NIL GO, and maybe they'll be able to do that. But if they keep getting shut down, if they keep being told, hey, you can't pay Tyron Stokes that amount of money just to show up on campus once, like if they start saying that, somebody's going to challenge it. And I'm very interested in what happens there, because if it ultimately gets challenged in a way where they can't really enforce third parties from paying student athletes, then Gonzaga's advantage that we've talked about so much on the show recently of having the same amount of, the same cap at $20 million, but not having a football team, that advantage goes bye-bye very quickly if these programs can basically just get out of this NIL GO collective, or this NIL GO commission trying to stop them from having their boosters spend money through these third-party NIL deals. So the Gonzaga wants the College Sports Commission to be thorough. They want them to be harsh, and they want it to be enforceable. Because if it's not, then we're only a year, maybe 2 years away from these schools being able to once again spend the kind of money that they want to spend, that they have to spend, or that boosters around them have to spend on the basketball players that they want right now. And that's why I think Gonzaga is going hard on the 2026 recruiting class, the 2027 recruiting class. They're trying to get some commitments now when they know that they have an advantage financially that these other programs, while they're still kind of in this limbo mode, are still trying to figure out. This is a fascinating time in college sports. I know it's frustrating for many. It's frustrating for myself in some ways to try to figure out how it's all going to work, but it is fascinating and it is unique, and it is interesting to see if this advantage for Gonzaga is something they can take advantage of, how long it's going to last, what the future is going to look like for NIL payments, for college sports in general. Obviously, for down the line, I think we're talking about employment and collective bargaining and various other things that we're not ready for yet, but that I think are coming down the pipeline fairly soon. So this is a topic we will revisit time and time again, but that's going to wrap it up for our conversation about it today here on Locked On Zags. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We got more coming your way. We're going to talk about if St. Mary's a viable option for the Pac-12. We'll talk more about Mario St-Superi and his addition to this Gonzaga program. We're going to talk about Summer League coming up on July 10th, what that means for Ryan Nemhart and Ben Gregg and Caleb Battle, Drew Timme participating in Summer League as well. We'll keep you up to date on that recruiting in the 2026 class, 2027 recruits as well. All sorts of great stuff coming your way here on Locked On Zags, so don't miss it. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube if you have not done so yet. Thanks again, folks, for listening. Have a fantastic rest of your day and month of July. And, of course, as always, go Zags.